Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here, and we've got another comic book movie, Black Adam, featuring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Just hit theaters. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So Black Adam. So this movie, I think, has actually been delayed several times for the last couple of years. Various production issues and COVID and all that kind of stuff. And it's really this movie has been in the works for quite a long time. I think almost 10 years. And The Rock in the last while, kind of a passion project for him. So I think audiences have been kind of forced to patiently wait to see what Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has been cooking up. And unfortunately, I'm here to say that you might need to plug your nose because the cooking stinks. This movie is a dud. This thing does not work. It kind of ends up this sort of unappetizing stew of various ideas and tones that are all kind of thrown into this thing and simply do not come together in any kind of entertaining or meaningful or enjoyable way. So let's get into it. There is a few things that positives and stuff I do think about this. I think maybe the themes, which we'll get into later at the end of this review, there's some interesting stuff that it's trying to do. It's just sort of the way that it does it just doesn't work. And the character, if you're not familiar with Black Adam, the character, he's kind of indestructible, invulnerable. He can't be killed. He can't be hurt. But the same can't be said about his debut film, which really kind of, I think, suffers death from 1,000 cuts. It doesn't necessarily do any one thing just like horribly, tediously, painfully bad. It's not like an offensively bad movie, but it kind of on the flip side of that is that it really just doesn't do anything well. There's no kind of area in this where you can point to and say, hey, this worked, but even if this didn't here, sort of everything ends up just sort of this dull kind of monotone and just boring story. And I think it's a testament, it's almost shocking that kind of The Rock is arguably the most charismatic, kind of energetic leading man in all of Hollywood, and kind of put him front and center and still somehow end up with this sort of an unengaging and boring film. Maybe the biggest issue, at least for me, that this movie has is that it just lacks a clear identity. The tone is very inconsistent. Kind of in the start of this film, it is somewhat compelling, and it kind of hints that this is going to be a darker and kind of more violent take on the superhero genre, and like some of the opening deaths and scenes are quite kind of gruesome and almost shockingly so, and kind of gets you on the edge of your seat. Like, okay, we're going for something different with this, but that quickly kind of gives way to just super campy and corny dialogue and kind of goofy gags, and where death in the opening scene is treated as this like horrific kind of shocking thing. By about the middle of this movie, it's just sort of this frivolous gag, and people are dying, and characters are laughing and watching, and no one cares, and it just sort of wavers back and forth between kind of this more kind of grounded realism and that I think the film kind of wants to be, and then sort of more this like fluffy bubblegum fantasy kind of traditional film that, I don't know, maybe it's the studios wanted it, but it really never does land anywhere in kind of a consistent tone or identity. The plot here also suffers from just sort of a lack of direction, in kind of in a wild way. It kind of ends up both convoluted and also overly simplistic. For most of at least the first two acts of this film, sort of a new team, the Justice Society of America. There's 3 or 4 kind of heroes that are sent on this mission to kind of capture Black Adam before he can kind of do harm and cause chaos wherever he is, which kind of leads to really about the first 2 acts of this movie are just a steady kind of parade of this kind of spectacle-driven action scenes. There's not a whole lot of room or kind of breathing room for characters to be developed or kind of get to know what their tensions. It's sort of hinted at here or there what some of their backstories are, which I think are interesting backstories. And there's moments where you go, I'd like to learn more about this, but quickly right back to another action scene, which just ends up being repetitive. The main character in this sort of Justice Society and Black Adam, they essentially have the same kind of conflict. They fight kind of here in this location, have this little talk about, you're not a hero, come with me, and then they have the same moment in the apartment building, and then they have the same moment in the street, and just sort of repeating story beats over and over. And there's kind of there's like a subplot to this of this sort of evil crown, this magical thing infused by the demonic powers that the villains are kind of are trying to get, and it suffers from the same fate. About three, maybe four different times, it repeats the same kind of narrative twist of where the villains finally catch the person with the crown, only to shockingly discover that they had actually given it to someone else, and then they find that person, and at the last minute they had given it to someone else, and just sort of all throughout this movie, just feels like it's spinning its wheels. It's kind of repeating things that have kind of retreading territory it's already done, rather than kind of move the story forward or explore new ideas. Maybe one of the areas where this movie does have some success is with those action scenes and kind of the cinematography. Even though I do think that largely it's the stuff that we've seen just countless times before, just sort of real highly stylized action and just like a gratuitous amount of slow motion, constantly slow motion through this. And some of that just doesn't feel original anymore. But some of those scenes, especially in the opening act, where Black Adam's is sort of fighting this whole army of people and it's kind of slow motion. He's finding different ways to defeat his enemies. Some of that does seem like it's inspired, and it is sort of captivating and interesting. And there's a character, a female character, Cyclone, who's one of the members of the Justice Society. And I liked her. I'm not familiar with the actress, but I found her compelling. And just the way she has like the power of wind, and the way that kind of visually they use her powers adds kind of some much needed vibrant colors and kind of life to what is otherwise just a completely kind of drab and colorless movie. As far as things kind of going on, like on the surface, this kind of content for you guys to consider. Profanity, kind of frequent minor profanities, at least 5 to 6 uses of the S word and some D and A and different swears. I didn't hear like an F bomb, but there is sort of, and I didn't find the minor profanity is overbearing or completely off putting, but that is, and there's this sort of some other kind of crude words that are scattered throughout. Sexuality, there's no sexuality in this. This is a violent movie that extremely high kill count, death count in this thing, and just sort of numberless bad guy gooned or killed in multiple different ways. Most of them are like electrocuted or smashed into walls, or just sort of various other ways to be killed. Mostly bloodless and kind of, it's not like gory or in that way, except for maybe. Like I said, the opening scene kind of hints that this is going to be a more violent movie, even if the rest of the film doesn't kind of follow up on that. And kind of two moments. One character is melted, kind of a la Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark, although it doesn't like linger on the character melting and turns into a skeleton, but it is quite gruesome. And in that scene, another character has his arm ripped off and kind of drops the severed limb right in the middle of the camera. That's gruesome. And then there's also some moments of like implied violence where like Black Adam in the fight in slow motion like takes a grenade and like puts it in a bad guy's like mouth, and then you don't see the aftermath, but obviously that's a horrific violent thing. So it definitely is a violent movie, although not as violent as maybe the opening scenes might lead you to believe. Maybe kind of another area of content to consider is spirituality. The film's kind of set in like a Egyptian-inspired ancient civilization, and they talk about kind of religious elements, and they refer to like the gods, and the gods are doing this and appease the gods. So there's that. Black Adam. The lines in the trailer, I think, where he says, he died a slave and was reborn as a god. He kind of sees himself as like almost like a deific figure. So there's sort of that element, and there is kind of a comment that where at one point Black Adam's kind of like temporarily imprisoned, and one of his like people that capture him makes the comment, they say gods control us, but we're the ones always burying them. Sort of almost like an atheistic kind of Nietzsche type comment. And also the villains in this, like the true antagonists, are kind of powered by demonic forces. This crown is said to be infused, powered by like 6 different demons who eventually you do see on screen for a moment, and they kind of empower their own champion, who ends up kind of in like a devilish form, and even has like a pentagram kind of emblazoned on his chest. Again, they're depicted as clearly being evil, but there is sort of some spirituality stuff kind of sprinkled all throughout this film. And like I said at the start, I think as far as like things kind of going on beneath the surface, themes, there is some interesting stuff in this, although I don't think that it was maybe unpacked as sophisticated or interesting as maybe I think it could have been. But there's a line that kind of encapsulates the central theme of this, where a character says, "The world doesn't always need a white knight. sometimes it needs something darker. And that's kind of the central kind of thematic tension throughout this, is sort of this tension, this balance between justice and like vengeance, and the question of like, do ends justify the means? Because Black Adam is contrasted against sort of this justice society. Black Adam is very much sort of vengeance. He's rage. He chooses violence. He fights with power. Where the Justice Society, they're more kind of law and order. They're sort of like almost representing the police. If Black Adam is more like the vigilante and like the classic comic book breakdown, they don't want to kill the enemies. They think that even the villains deserve to like be tried and kind of go through the system. And there's a pretty interesting scene where kind of after Black Adam goes on one of his initial like murder sprees and he's killing all these foreign oppressors of this city and this town. Kind of all the people, the civilians start cheering him, like embracing him as sort of he's their champion. He's the people's champ. Where the Justice Society are like booed, and kind of the people reject them and say, "Hey, you weren't here. You guys don't do what it takes to actually kind of free us and give us what we want." And it's an interesting scene because the film it kind of leaves it ambiguous. It doesn't necessarily tell you whether you should be like agreeing with the people. It seems like it's a heroic moment, even though obviously it's a very morally compromised character. And kind of related to that, a lot of the kind of the growth, I guess, of Black Adam's character is sort of the idea that, hey, he's not a hero, and maybe he doesn't. Maybe he needs to grow and learn some areas, but that he doesn't necessarily need to become a hero. And there's actually a lot of his value to the people is the fact that he's not a hero. Where someone tells him in the film, they said they don't need a hero, they need to be free. So they don't just need to be heroic. They just want results. They want you to get rid of the oppressors, no matter how violent that is. And another later. Talking to Black Adam, a character says, it's the darkness that lets him do what heroes cannot. And it's interesting, I think thematically and kind of narratively, it's super interesting, and kind of I think it's maybe a bit of a unique conversation. I think for Christians, maybe it's a little bit more of like a thorny issue of, sort of like an anti-hero and kind of justifying violence. Pierce Brosnan, who I didn't mention, I found his character interesting. Wish he was in it more. His character is Dr. Fate, and you can kind of see like endless futures and kind of know what's happening. And kind of because of that, near the end of the film, he says, "No, so we don't believe in absolutes." And in context, he's not really talking about like moral relativism necessarily, but it is kind of consistent with, I think, a lot of the thematic stuff in this film, which I think does ask viewers difficult questions like, do peaceful ends justify violent means? Where is that line? Can we cross the line? So again, I think Christians will have a lot to navigate through that, but I did find that sort of some interesting questions being asked. So in the end, this movie it did not work, despite having some interesting moments and some kind of thematic stuff that did intrigue me. But unfortunately, those good elements just kind of get buried beneath this pile of just sort of boring spectacle. There's just not a lot of energy. There's not kind of a clear identity to immerse you. The switching tones kind of keeps pulling you out of what kind of film you're watching. Even Dwayne Johnson's sort of superpowered charisma and charm is just not enough to compensate for sort of an otherwise this entirely unenjoyable film. But hey, if you guys watch this, especially if you're, again, I'm not familiar with like the actual character, the source material. So if you are and you enjoy this a lot more than me, or you know this stuff, we'd love to have that conversation with you. We'd love to hear other perspectives on this film. So jump in the comments section. Again, if you haven't done so, I encourage you guys, subscribe to our channel, like this video. We've got a lot of movie reviews and show reviews and live streams and this fun stuff that we're doing here at The Collision. We'd love to have you be a part of that. But stay safe, guys. Thanks for watching, and continue to collide with your world for Christ.